Paul and the Corinthians, and indeed the whole Christian church, faced challenges that seem foreign to us. The church grew up a tiny minority within established cultures, whether Jewish culture, as the church did in and around Jerusalem, or Greek and Roman cultures, as the church did in the rest of the world. As the church began to spread and to chart its own course in the world, it had to think about how it should relate to the dominant cultural and even religious norms around them. One of those norms in the Roman Empire was buying meat in the marketplace, meat that had been offered as sacrifices to the Roman and Greek gods. Could Christians buy and eat such meat? Paul's answer may surprise you. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022. Chapter 8 of 1 Corinthians is relatively brief, but it is pretty subtle in the way Paul answers a ticklish question. Animal sacrifice was a common part of worship in most of the Roman Empire, both among Jews as well as among most Greeks and Romans. It was so common a practice that it was as much a cultural practice as it was religious. But the meat sacrificed to the gods was treated differently in different places. Meat sacrificed at the temple in Jerusalem was either burned up completely in a fire or eaten by the Levites, the priestly class. Now, this wasn't because the Levites were greedy. It was part of established Jewish law and custom, since the Levites, alone among the tribes, were not allotted any land to live off of, but were supported by the monetary offerings and the animal sacrifices brought to the temple. In the rest of the Roman world, though, animal sacrifices were often handled differently. As in Jerusalem, some of the meat would have been burned entirely. What remained, however, could be sold in the local meat markets, where shoppers came day in and day out to buy food to feed their families. This is an instance where the line between religious practice and cultural practice blurred. The meat had been a part of a religious practice, but buying it for one's family table was clearly a cultural practice, largely unrelated to the religious significance of the sacrifice itself. This is where a question arose for the Corinthians. It was just one more of a long list of things where they were divided and asked for Paul's opinion. Here's how he begins his answer. Part of his answer will knock your socks off. Now, concerning food sacrificed to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Anyone who claims to know something does not yet have the necessary knowledge, but anyone who loves God is known by him. Hence, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that no idol in the world really exists, and there is no God but one. Indeed, even though there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as in fact there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. This is only the first half of Paul's answer to the Corinthians, and already there is more to unpack than I can in this brief devotional. The real issue here for Paul is the same that we have seen all along. There were those in the Corinthian church who felt spiritually superior to their fellow believers. One of the ways this supposed superiority played out was evidently in the treatment of purchasing meat that one knew had been used in sacrifices to Greek or Roman gods. From the context of this chapter, it's pretty clear that those who believed themselves to be spiritually superior regarded purchasing this meat to be a matter of personal choice. To these people, Paul begins with a warning about spiritual pride. Spiritual pride, says Paul, leaves little room for love, which is the highest of all values. Then he turns to an answer in which he begins by agreeing in part with the folks who believed eating such meat was not a matter of religious consequence. Once again, quoting the Corinthians themselves, he agrees that Christians have only one God, and that meat sacrificed to other gods was therefore not a truly religious sacrifice. But notice one thing he says here that should have caused your ears to perk up. Paul says, "Indeed, even though there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as in fact there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God." Is Paul in effect admitting that there are other gods? It certainly seems so on the face of it. But Paul isn't really addressing that issue. All he's really saying here is that it is clear people actually worship many different gods, whether they exist or not. But for Christians, there is indeed only one God, the Creator of heaven and earth, whom we have come to know in Jesus Christ. So in a sense, the spiritually proud are correct. Eating meat sacrificed to idols is not the same thing as participating in the worship of those gods. It's a really fascinating argument Paul makes here, but he's not done. What he's done so far is to set the stage for his final answer on the matter. The spiritually proud among the Corinthians think this should settle the issue once and for all. It boils down to a personal choice. But as we will see tomorrow, Paul lets them know in no uncertain terms that it is not a matter of personal choice at all. Not within the Christian community, it isn't. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.